All right, we should probably begin, but here's my question. Who made these delightful? They're just so cute. Who made these? Nobody? Okay. Well, let's see. You made the eggs, right? And banana bread, I think. Zucchini bread. Whoever made that, thank you as well. So why don't we start? And just to explain this, I'm going to have a reading from Jeremiah. And the first part is Jeremiah asking a question, and then it's God answering. So if you're wondering what, because it deals with evil, but then listen to God's reply. So in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. A reading from the book of Jeremiah. You would be right, O Lord, if I should dispute with you. Even so, I must lay out the case against you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the treacherous live in contempt? You planted them, let them take root, they flourish, they bear. You are on their lips, but you are far from their thoughts. If running against you has wearied you, how will you race with horses? And if you are not safe on level ground, what will you do in the jungles of the Jordan? The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I love that because he's complaining. He says, Lord, I know you're always right, but I got a problem with you. Why does evil always prosper? They take root, and you let them take root. You let them flourish. And God's reply back is, if running against men wearies you, how will you run against horses? And you think, what does that mean? Like, we're meant to become stronger and stronger. And the idea of the horse is strong. We're supposed to eventually even become stronger than a horse. More powerful, swifter than everything. But you're not going to become swift unless you can contend with evil. So Jeremiah complains there's evil in this world and you let it prosper, and God's response is, yeah, and you fighting against evil is going to make you incredibly powerful. That's why I let it happen. Does that make sense? Okay, well, that's actually Irenaeus' whole theology, so we covered it. You guys understand? We can leave. But anyhow, so I want to take two early saints, their view on evil, and Saint Irenaeus, one of my all-time favorites, and his idea is the inevitability of evil, and the greater you focus on the good, the more the more we ask questions about evil. So the odd thing about Christianity is that it's relatively unique compared to other world religions, that it's that egg really did me in. No, just kidding, I don't know what it is. But other world religions, believe it or not, are not concerned with evil. Most of them is, well, the world's evil, what are you going to do about it? But with the growing recognition of the magnitude and the power of Christ's saving work and the focus on the goodness of creation, even the early Christians had to answer this question. If the God is so good, why does he allow so much evil? And this is unlike Buddhism. Only Jews and Christians really exalt the divine in creation, but it also demands a greater response. Well then, if the world is so good, why is there so much evil? And I told you before, the word for this is theodicy. Theodicy, it's an attempt to explain how can the world be good and how could God be good if there's so much evil in the world. And so I want to cover two today. One is Irenaeus, and the other one is St. Augustine. But first Irenaeus. So Irenaeus is the earliest thinkers to systematize a Christian account of good and evil. And He's kind of one of the first. Now, Irenaeus is in the Latin-speaking part of the early church. He's in Lyon. Now, actually, in the very early church, everybody spoke Greek. I know you kind of think, oh, it's Latin. No, it's Greek, Greek, Greek. It's Greek all the way from to the beginning. And sorry about that. No, it's not water. I don't know what it is. It's kind of like a stabbing pain in my heart. I don't think so. Yeah, do we have a crash cart around here? Anyhow, so Polycarp, Irenaeus is a disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp was a disciple of John the Evangelist. So my only point is that gives him incredible good street cred, because he's right next to the Apostle John. And he's one of the first people to write logically about Christianity, to explain it to the world. In fact, Irenaeus is so important because you could say, well, who told you that the four Gospels are the four Gospels? The first person to ever mention the written four Gospels is Saint Irenaeus. So he's an incredibly early saint, clear back to the time of the apostles. And his greatest work was this book called Against Heresies, where he's writing against what's called Gnosticism. Gnosticism was very popular among the shishi fufu haha of the Mediterranean. And, oh, you don't know what that shishi fu ha 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 means? It means kind of the super intellectual elites. They believed in Gnosticism. They believed Gnostic means the secret knowledge, that they have a secret knowledge and power that you guys don't have. And one of the things they believe, that all material creation is a source of evil, and that the only goodness lies deep inside you, and deep inside you is this spark of innocence, your spirit, but it's surrounded by evil flesh. So everything material, flesh, it's all evil. Now, Martin Luther, he had kind of this opposite view, because that sounds like Catholicism. But like Martin Luther said, no, deep down, and he uses a German word, shit, that deep down every human person is made of shit. And you just have the grace of God covering it up. So positive. What's that? Scheisen. I should have used it. What does Scheisen mean, I wonder? Anyhow, the Catholic view is different. The Catholic view is, no, deep down, we are good. We're just covered with filth. Does that make sense? Now, you could say, well, how's that different than the Gnostics? But Catholics don't say the flesh is evil. It's weak, but it's not evil. Gnostics said it was evil, and they believed that Jesus only appeared to be made of flesh, but really he was ghostly. He just looked like he was real. Does that make sense? Because everything flesh is, anything material is evil. They also believe the Eucharist was evil because the Eucharist contains matter. Does that make sense? So everything's very ethereal, very New Age. And they'd say, if you free yourself, and I hear this among New Agers today, if you free yourself from the material world, you'll become truly spiritual. So the Gnostics loved to think that they were spiritually superior than everybody else. And they said they hated the body and material things. But to be honest, they were just massive hypocrites, because they lived in uber wealth and lavish lifestyles, sexually very aggressive. And they couldn't see the inconsistency that they preached. The body is evil, but they indulged in everything they could. And you can say, well, that's bizarre. Let me just stop here for a second. It's very true. Anybody who is really anti-sex, like you meet a priest or some minister who's like, sex is evil. I guarantee you they're slipping under the wrong fence at night. Trust me, I have tons of stories. So the Gnostics had that same idea, but the Gnostics believe that there's a new God in the New Testament. You have an old God in the Old Testament and a completely new God. And Irenaeus, one of his responses, Catholicism is from Judaism. So anyhow, when it comes to evil, this sounds kind of strange. Irenaeus teaches that evil is necessary because we have to face up to it for our human development. So Irenaeus posits a picture of evil as inevitable and necessary component for the advancement of the human race. That sounds kind of strange, but think about Jeremiah, what he said to God, why is there evil in the world? God says, yeah, I do let evil continue. But it's so that you can become stronger than horses. So according to Irenaeus, humanity, this sounds kind of strange, must admit and succumb and face up to evil with all its terrible pain, suffering, and death. So he uses the example of Jonah. Jonah, if you remember the story of Jonah in the Old Testament, Jonah loves to say how religious he is. Jonah hates the pagans, loves to say how religious he is. But in the book of Jonah, guess who's the most bigoted, awful person in the book of Jonah? Jonah. He loves to talk how he's so holy, but he's really not. The pagans are better than Jonah. But Irenaeus says, and this is true, everything changes when he's in the belly of the fish. And he said that's an analogy of the human fall. Like all of us are like Jonah. We love to think that we're super religious, but until you get swallowed by the fish and get on the bottom of the ocean, it's on the bottom of the ocean where Jonah actually prays for the first time. Before that, he talks a lot about prayer, but you never see him pray. It's after the fish where Jonah actually, when he's at his absolute lowest, that he comes to believe in God and believe in love. And so Irenaeus is saying we must realize that we've sinned and realize the damage our sin has done. Then God can save us. Because before that, it's just talk, talk, talk. Then God will raise us up, and having passed through this journey, humanity will learn to experience truly what evil is and how mercifully God is. And so it's kind of the similar point of Dante's Inferno. Have you heard that? First, you have to go through hell to get to paradise. Because a lot of people, what they want out of religion is, I've accepted Jesus, so I just walk into paradise. Irenaeus says, if you accept Christ, first you have to face up to evil. We become fit for our destiny, which is union with the divine and communion with others, by first facing down evil. And so for Irenaeus, to be blessed, one must experience what it means to be damned. To be blessed, one must face up to evil. Then Christ can lead us to a whole new life. So Irenaeus' theology is that we're transformed by facing up to evil. And this part of Irenaeus, when I read it 30 years ago, it blew my mind. So I'm hoping this will blow your mind. But Irenaeus' view is when God initially created Adam and Eve, they were immature and childlike. They were innocent, but immature. And this gets into some Hebrew that I'm going to skip. But you know when it's the Bible starts with the Garden of Eden and ends with the Garden of Eden, but the Garden of Eden is, in the end, heaven? The Garden of Eden was paradise. But he said, and in the Hebrew, if you get to the Garden of Eden is the garden of potentiality. It's not the garden of fulfillment. That's going to be heaven, where we become exactly what we're meant to be. The Garden of Eden was the beginning of human potentiality. And so this sounds kind of strange. Do you understand what I mean by that? So you kind of think, oh, like I'll say this sometimes, and when I say, we need to return to the Garden of Eden, I like that image, but it means go to heaven. But actually, like Irenaeus would not like that phrase, because no, you don't want to return back to the way you were when you were a toddler. Does that make any sense? You don't want to become more immature. Humanity was created immature. So, like he said, humanity was created innocent and united, but Christ was always going to come for humanity to evolve us to the next higher level. What Adam and Eve sinning did was not bring about Christ. Christ would have come anyhow. The sin of Adam and Eve brought about the cross. And now we're going to evolve by embracing the cross of Christ. But Christ would have come either way to bring us to a higher spiritual life. Does that make sense? So, anyhow, because I hear sometimes people say, oh, the sin of Adam and Eve brought Christ. No, Christ would have come, we're just in our infancy. So Irenaeus' idea, and this goes clear back to John, is that the whole human race must mature. Not just us individually, but, and I'm using modern language, mature as a species to become more and more connected with each other and God. And to get to maturity, we have to know the consequences of evil. That's what the fall of Adam and Eve did. The consequences of isolation. Then we can welcome the new grace of a new life. So communion with the divine means to be like Christ in the desert. Christ in the desert faces down Satan. Christ faces down Satan, but it says he was attended to by angels and was with the wild beasts. So that means like the St. Francis image, that you're one with heaven, one with the earth, but you become a St. Francis by facing down the devil. Or anybody here fans of Lord of the Rings? Oh, how sad. I forget his name, starts with a G. The gray wizard, Gandalf. Gandalf becomes the white wizard when he falls and battles this demon. And you kind of think, oh my gosh, he battled this terrible demon, so he's dead. No. By battling the demon, he becomes even more holy and wise. He becomes the white wizard. Does that make sense? So that the reason why that's written in his books is that that's a very Catholic understanding. You become holy by battling evil. Or there's this other movie called Star Wars. Anybody ever heard of that? And the one thing, Luke just wants to become this Jedi, but he's shocked. No, to become a Jedi, he must face Darth Vader. He must face the evil. That's very Irenaeus. You want to become incredibly holy? You have to actually face up to evil. So Irenaeus' theology is about maturity. The maturation is complete, and our desires are transformed when we really have to face up to evil. Then we can be completely united with God. So humanity's rebellion against God and descent into sin is the result that then all of us, individually in a species, always has to face up to evil. So what we learn is what it means to be transformed by experiencing the pains we inflict on others, the pain that has been inflicted on us, actually makes us closer to Christ, both by mourning the pain we inflicted on other people and the pain that evil has inflicted to us. It brings us to this greater spirituality. Or there's this country song I really liked a couple years ago. I just thought it was so great. And I can't remember the title, but the country song is so cute. This guy's singing, and when he was a teenager, all he wanted was a fast truck. And then when he fell in his life, all I wanted was to marry that girl. And then when I had kids, all I wanted to do was protect my kids. And then his last line is, as an old man, now all I want is to love everyone. And it's such a sweet thing, this love expanding. Does that make sense? I don't want the truck. I got the wife, and that's okay. But it's just a song about kind of the spiritual maturity. Now, to make it Irenaeus, he would have had to say, truck was great, but that desire is not a full desire. Or, to be Irenaeus, it would be like, oh, I realized that wasn't good enough. Does that make sense? I needed to face evil. Anyhow, so Adam and Eve were not wrong in wanting to be like God. They're wrong that thinking that material feasting or cunningness, and that's what, cheating was going to make them more like God. We become more loving like God, not by the way Adam and Eve thought, by trying to undercut God, but realizing that nothing will satiate our real desire except God alone. But to get to the idea that, it's only God I hunger, to grasp the divine, you first have to empty yourself out. And you get empty because you've learned that through evil, the only thing that will really satisfy us is God himself. So that's why those in heaven, they feast on the life of God. But you have to go through this process of losing, he'd say, your immaturity. And losing your immaturity happens when you face up to evil. Either that's been inflicted upon you or you've inflicted. So Irenaeus said, youth is impatient. And it's only after you know the pain of impatience that you learn patience. And we're like impatient children. That first we have to learn patience, and to learn patience requires suffering. Or another example, I had this friend, he died, but his name was Pete Simon. He was a great guy. But he had this son who is about, 20 years younger than I am. And Pete was wise, and one day his son was just being obnoxious, drinking too much, getting into trouble. And Pete said to his son, I love you, but you'll be leaving my house now. He said it. And anyhow, I was shocked. He says, and by the way, everything in your bedroom, that's mine too. He said, I don't care what you do. You're out. Find your own way. Now, his son actually turned out great. So his son was telling me the story, and I love Pete Sr., but his son was telling he threw me out of the house without anything. And so he said, I quickly realized just how immature I was when I had to fend for myself. And Pete Jr., he went to college, successful, family man. Does that make sense? And he says, only as a 40-year-old man can I say, wow, best thing my dad did was make me suffer. Does that, you know what I mean? Or similar story, that's very Irenaeus. Or my third nephew, who's really obnoxious. Anyhow, my sister, he was just a pain in the rear end. And if you met him, he's very charismatic and schmoozy. You know what I mean? But my sister, who's doesn't have a lot of patience to begin with, she told him, you have to mow the lawn. You have to mow the lawn. Third time she came home, the lawn wasn't mowed, so she mowed it herself. And when he came home, he said, Billy, I asked you to mow the lawn. I had asked 3 times, and I'm a 50-year-old woman. And so I mowed the lawn myself. So I said, Billy, the last gift I'm going to give you is that I boxed up your clothing that I bought, but you'll be leaving my house right now. He said, And it was. He was technically, you're 18 years old. He hadn't finished high school, but he's 18 years old, and he says, Billy, I want you out of my, not, no, sorry, it wasn't Billy. Billy's a good one. It was Mikey. Mikey, I want you out of my house. So anyhow, then she called me, and I said, wow. And she said, I know. She said, it was really hard. I kicked him out of my house, and then I went and threw up in the bathroom. And I said, well, where is he going to stay? And she says, well, he's going to stay with one of his friends. But now he's 18. And he's got to realize there's consequences. She cried. So anyhow, then Mikey called me, and I said, Mikey, have you met your mother? She doesn't pull punches. Why did you think you could just smooth her over? So what is Mikey going to do? He actually just joined the Navy, and then blah, 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 his life gets on track. But this sounds kind of strange. Yeah, we have to face up to our... Irenaeus says, why is there evil in the world? He doesn't really explain why there's evil in the world, but he does say, his whole point, it's necessary that we face up to our own evil, the evil that's in the world, because it makes us mature Christians. So that's what I mean by the inevitability of evil. Does that make sense? So it does serve a purpose. Now, Irenaeus says there's two types of evil: moral evil and natural evil. So he's the first person to put it in these categories. So natural evil is earthquakes and plagues. Moral evil is evil that's caused by the intention of the human heart. So extrinsic or natural evil, believe it or not, he says, yeah, it exists, but it can make us more compassionate. And that sounds kind of cruel, but look at Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day, if you know who she wasn't Catholic, she was an atheist. But as a little girl, she was in San Francisco when the great earthquake happened. And she says that as a little girl, she says, it was an amazing time. That everybody lost everything, and people were so compassionate. People that didn't even talk to each other before suddenly were amazingly compassionate. And she says, I look back on that and I think, why can't an earthquake happen every day? Or 9/11, this New Yorker's talking about 9/11. And they said, usually in New York, New Yorkers, I guess, are naturally, they don't care where you're going. They don't want to know your name. They're harsh. And he was saying it was amazing. After 9/11, suddenly, people would suddenly ask each other, who'd you lose? And they'd be hugging and crying in each other's arms. Very un-New Yorkish. And Irenaeus uses these examples that, wow, in all these natural disasters, not always, but sometimes, it makes people far more compassionate. Does that make sense? So, yeah, even natural disasters, as evil as they are, it brings us to a greater spiritual maturity where we care more for other people. Moral evil, what he also calls intrinsic evil, moral evil is what we do to each other. And use this example. Let's say like texting while driving. That is a moral evil because you trained yourself in certain ways not to care about the people around you. And for Irenaeus, you train yourself to behave in a certain way. And then you inflict it on others without even knowing it. And so some training, it limits your growth into growing into love, from seeking deeper truths or caring to other people's. And we have to experience the pain of evil to freely choose the divine. So this sounds kind of strange. Yes, you text while you're driving. You're going to end up in an accident. You may actually even kill somebody, and you're going to go through hell. And maybe that's because that hell is going to save you from the training that you were immature to begin with. Or this other, I was really happy to hear this other teenager in our parish, him and two other, he has a truck, but him and two other boys, they went to a bank parking lot when it was snowed and were just doing cookies. There's nothing wrong with cookies, right? Unless it's our parking lot. But of course, his car hits the curb. It's still drivable, but wonky. Like the steering wheel's clear over. And so his parents had the car fixed. But his mother, and I know this sounds strange, mother said to him, well, it's turned out to be a little bit more expensive. And we're not paying for it. That was your mistake. Does that make sense? Like, Irenaeus would say, if those parents paid for that truck, that would have been evil. Because the kid, his name is Lechuga, he needs to experience a consequence of his actions. So it's like, I'm not going to do cookies because just even a haphazard accident cost me a lot of money. Does that make sense? Like, so Irenaeus is saying, you have to experience the pain of your own foolishness. So Irenaeus would say that that's why God does allow evil. Not because evil is good, but because it brings us to our own maturity. Even the moral evil that hurts us as much as other people whom we've hurt, it causes us to recognize the suffering of our own world. Then we can choose God. So God will not, Irenaeus says, God will not compel us to choose God. He will simply offer us salvation. And the deeper we get into despair, the deeper we make our mistakes, the more attractive the God becomes. So despite the fact that we try to damn ourselves, we'll nonetheless find ourselves more powerfully attracted to God's mercy and love the more we realize our own mistakes. So the more we suffer in patience, the more impatient we come. What's truly sad is not to choose God's mercy when we experience evil. What's truly sad is that when we commit evil, don't have people cover up our mistakes. Does that make sense? This is, it is rebellious. It's a rebellious child theory of evil. So 2 more points. First, is it true to be blessed, one must first be damned? I know that sounds kind of straight. This is the part I didn't like about Irenaeus' theology, because my dad used to say, you have to make your own mistakes. And I remember thinking, really, do I? Because is that true? Can't I just learn from your mistakes? Because he made a bunch. Is it true that Adam and Eve, that we as humans always choose the hard way? I hate to say it. I used to not think that. I used to think my dad was wrong. Now I think sometimes human beings always choose the hard way. And I think Irenaeus is right. The second is, doesn't this account trivialize the vastness of evil? Because some suffering of evil is horrendous. And like the Holocaust, doesn't the pain of the Holocaust seem wholly out of proportion with Irenaeus' lesson that, well, it does teach us what morally good is? Really, millions died? To gaze into the eyes of 12 million people died in the Holocaust and say, yeah, but it did improve some people's moral lives seems a little hollow to me. Did Irenaeus ever go to a child cancer ward? So I don't know. That's a problem I have with Irenaeus. Does it really have to be that way? Or, because I think some people, even though they suffer, they don't become more morally deep people. No offense to anybody in the room, but I remember when I was a kid, there was this guy who was Irish, and he's now 70. He's 86 right now. But he said, when he was growing up, there's all these Irish women. And he said, oftentimes, he said, and I never forgot this, he said, with older Irish women, it's one of 2 things. Either they're very, they're all harsh, but some are either bitter, other ones are harsh, but they'll do anything for you. And I remember as a kid thinking, why is it? Because Irish women had this would have been 100 years ago, because he's 86. They had hard lives. But why did some turn out bitter and others turn out loving? Like, even as a kid, I was like, why didn't it turn them all loving? Irenaeus doesn't explain that. There you go. So anyhow, I don't know. But here's the thing. So this is a very ancient, Irenaeus' idea is that evil brings us as a whole species to greater maturity. Individually brings us to greater maturity. But the one thing you must do is face up to evil. So does that explain Irenaeus' thought of why there is evil? It's necessary. That the world is broken. Adam and Eve, it's broken since Adam and Eve. And we must face up to all the pain of evil. Okay, the other early church father who spoke about evil is St. Augustine. Now, he's, this is a couple hundred years later, and he's writing in Latin. Latin comes about 400 years later. But Augustine, his theology is evil is the disordering of God. And Augustine was one of the greatest human theorists of human interiority, except he says the true locus of evil is not the effects on the world, its effect on our soul. So Irenaeus is about our response to evil, the necessary to stand up to it. Augustine talks about the effect of evil in your soul. And for Augustine, there's kind of, if you don't know who he is he's kind of called the second founder of the Christian faith because he was and is one of the greatest thinkers in the West. Really, I'd say Christ, obviously, then St. Paul, and then Augustine. So when I was confirmed, I took the name Augustine because I wanted to be a priest, but he was such an incredible philosophical thinker. He was a genius of his age. And he was born in northern Africa to a Christian mother and a non-Christian father. And his parents realized at the beginning that he was a prodigy, so they pushed him to be a rhetorician. And so his biography, he didn't want to be baptized for a long time because he enjoyed his wild life. And he had a very wild life. So first, he was a genius. Secondly, he was a sex addict. Really, he was a sex. Then later, he teaches in Rome and Milan. Milan was the imperial city at the time. And he lectures in front of the emperor. And then he meets this guy named St. Ambrose when he's 32 years old. And Ambrose is a genius as well. And Ambrose converts Augustine, changes his entire life. Augustine goes back to Africa to set up this monastery, kind of this think tank, and spend his rest of his life just eat, pray, and work. But unfortunately, he goes into the city, and when you go, now remember, for the first half of Christianity, who elected bishops? How many people say the Pope? How many people say the people? Yeah. I wish we would get back to that. Now they're parachuted in from some unknown diocese. Most of them never been parish priest. But the bishop is old, and he's coming to the end, and Augustine comes into the city. And he sees Augustine. Remember, Augustine was a genius at his time, but now he just wants to be this hermit that prays. And he sees Augustine because they're going to elect a new bishop. And so the old bishop says, "That is Augustine. Elect Augustine." So Augustine kind of gets forced. And so it's kind of funny, too, because that's what happened to St. Ambrose, Augustine's mentor. Ambrose wasn't even Christian, but he was this great intellectual. And they're about to elect a bishop in Milan. And I think this is a funny story. And they have two candidates, and the Christian community was sharply divided about who to elect. So they send in Ambrose, who's not even a Christian, to calm down the fighting, and they were so taken with Ambrose, they said, well, we elect you. He says, I'm not even Christian. He says, we can take care of that. They baptized him and ordained him, baptized, confirmed, first Eucharist, and became bishop in the same day. I mean, so kind of happens to Augustine too, but anyhow, so they convince him to become a priest and bishop, and for the next 40 years he spends his life being a bishop, but writing hundreds of sermons and theological works. He's the first person to ever write an autobiography in human history. And he writes his own autobiography, but like he spells it all out. And he becomes the major theologian of the West. In fact, some of his sermons are still being discovered today. In 2008, which they unearthed one of his sermons. Now, he's from North Africa, and African Christianity was beset by this harshness of this guy named Tertullian. Tertullian, great historian, but wow, I was actually in a major city once, and somebody had a shirt that said, pray for Tertullian, he needs it. And I thought, oh, that's got to be like some seminarian or theologian. So Tertullian, so much of the tradition of African Christianity in the late and 5th century was captured by this work of Tertullian. And Tertullian squarely placed evil on human beings who were created for good or evil. But along with this, he said the responsibility is about punishment. So after the fall, humanity suffers evil, and he believed everybody deserved to suffer. That's not the same as Irenaeus. Tertullian's like modern, no offense, evangelical Christians that are thrilled that some people are going to be suffering for their sins. Tertullian's vision of evil is really incredibly vindictive. It's not about becoming better. Evil exists to make us become better. Tertullian said, in heaven, the good will exchange places with their gladiatorial persecutors. So the great Christian joy in heaven will be watching sinners suffer in hell. Like, what? Like, heaven's entertainment is watching bad people suffering? So think about this. Augustine, he was wild in his youth. So Augustine really fights against the Tertullian theology that, oh, the good thing about evil is we'll see our persecutors suffer. And Augustine is, no, you should be sad by that. He will completely contrast that heaven is rejoicing in love and thanksgiving of God for the healing. And if anyone's not in heaven, it's a great tragedy. So I just want, that's one of his influences that he's fighting. Because you'll find, even today, evangelical Christians are often Tertullian. They're thrilled that some people are going to be burning in hell. Does that make sense? If anything, that should break your heart. That's Augustine. The other fight Augustine had is the Manichaeans. Manichaeans believed the world was created in this cosmic battle, and evil is just part of our DNA. So anyhow, the Manichaeans became, it's called Jansenism. Jansenism where everything's a sin. Now, no offense, in northern Idaho tends to be highly Jansenistic. No, like I had to cut off people from the confessional. They go to another parish, Joan of Arc, who they'll come to confession so often that my own people don't get to go to confession. So when I was first here, there's this huge line for confession. This one woman of our parish said, all these Joan of Arc peoples get here, and I can't go to confession because then you have Mass. So then I came up with this rule that, no, if you're not from St. Pius, you can't go to confession till 4 o'clock. So from 3, and so I put a sign up. And so this sounds kind of strange. That's just not a problem here. That was a problem at St. George and St. Thomas. And like I'll have one of these people go to confession before Mass, and then they came back later after Mass if they can go to confession again. Like, what the hell could you have done in 1 hour? Or they'll say, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. My last confession was yesterday. And so they clog up. So I just cut them off here. But then, like, they clog up St. Thomas and St. George because everything is a sin. Like, does that make sense? Like, now I'm against sin. But, you know, come on. Jansenism is, oh my gosh, I said a cuss word, I'm going to burn in hell. Does that make sense? And that's how they view each other, not just themselves. But that's very reminiscent of what Augustine is fighting. This over-exaggeration that everything is evil and sin. And he would say, evil is not a rival to God. So he comes up with this kind of different, like, because he, really, Augustine's early childhood is really quite wild. He's far more compassionate. He's against evil, but he's more compassionate. And Augustine's view of evil is that it's many things. I'm going to explain this. It's an interior disordering of the soul. So Augustine's story of evil is very different. In his view, the fall in one way is a mystery. Punishment in this life is universal, but it's obscure and unevenly distributed. Some people suffer more than other people, but ultimately it's going to be God's justice and mercy that is revealed. So Augustine would not want you to focus on why evil is unevenly distributed. Why do some people suffer more? Augustine doesn't want to focus on that. Augustine would want to focus on our psychological participation with evil. That's what I mean by the disordering of the soul. So to articulate his view, he makes 3 fundamental claims about sin and evil. One is that sin is a privation. First, evil is a privation, meaning that evil is an irrational swerving from the holy good of creation. So evil is this absence of the good. It's a privation, a lessening of the good. And the evil of an act is simply how it lessens existence in some way. It distorts creation. So if I hit a child, the child will mistrust people even more. And I've taught the child that violence is the way to live and deal with other people. So it's evil because I've damaged the web of human relations and affections. I've made that web a little thinner and more frail. And I've set about making the web less affectionate and being. And I've also lessened the soul of the child. If the child thinks violence is the way to go, but I've also, by committing that sin, damaged my own soul. So he would say that this sounds kind of strange. There's nothing to evil. So if I lie, a lie misleads people to loosen their grip on reality and become less trusting. And there's less goodness in the world. But if I lie, and the lie is discovered, their trust in me is lessened and my connection to the web of human life. Furthermore, if the lie is undiscovered, then my own trust in the world is damaged because I think I can lie and get away with it. So it's my mistrust of others cuts away. Now, what's interesting about Augustine's talking about lying is Dan Aronelli, the social psychologist, found this to be true. So I told this story before. he did this huge study on lying, did these experiments. So the experiment would be like this. Let's say they take two groups of people. In one group of people, they say, oh, we're going to give you some Gucci glasses, but they're fake Gucci glasses. But for 1 month, you just have to tell people that they're real, even though they're fake. Now, at the beginning of they give you a test on honesty before this experiment and after. Now, so this group, they give you a fake pair of Gucci glasses, but they tell people that they're real. This group of people, they say, here's some real Gucci glasses. Does that make sense? Now, in secret, guess what? Everybody has received real Gucci glasses. But what is the effect of the people who, even though they're real Gucci glasses, they're lying? Does that make sense? What effect does that have? Believe it or not, after a month, these people, the second time they took an honesty test, it goes way down. And psychologically, these people justify it by saying, well, everybody lies. And the more you say everybody lies, the more you lie. So it has two effects. The more you lie, the more you lie. And they became far more cynical about human beings. So even though nobody would know that you're lying, and in fact you're not lying, they're real Gucci glasses, the very fact that you kept that lie to yourself damaged your relationship to other people. You think other people are just as bad as you are. Does that make sense? It made you more crass and more. So Dan Iannelli said, don't even lie about fake products because it just causes you to be a harder, harsher person. Well, 2,000 years ago, Augustine was talking about that. That the problem with evil is that it lessens creation, and evil lessens your own soul. Does that make any sense? It makes your soul less. It does damage to your own soul. So Augustine, this idea of privation, is that he said, there is no metaphysical substance to evil. And that's a little hard to get your head around. But what it means, it's a nothing. Augustine believed that demons and Satans, he did believe in demons and Satans, but he said he understood demons and Satans as rival spirits rebelling against God, but are nonetheless under God's control. So creation out of nothing means that Satan and demons, they're no threat to God. Satan is still part of creation, and God is in and above and beyond creation. So evil never threatens God. Evil threatens creation and does damage to us. Does that make sense? So creation is essentially good, but with original sin, it's broken. So that brokenness means that now we can use things for evil. So this would be a very Catholic. You can't say beer is evil. That's not true. The misuse of beer is evil. Does that make sense? Now, this is completely different than Mormons, because they'd say, no, it's completely evil. That's very Manichaeism, that material things can be evil. Material things are not evil or non-evil. It's the misuse of them. Does that make any sense? So, no, it's a damage our soul brings that creates the evil. So that's that. The second is perversion. He claims that, this is a perversion theory, that the doer of evil is being perverted. So back to Lord of the Rings. Anybody here read Lord of the Rings or watch the show? Okay, once again, only the good people. In Lord of the Rings, he picks up this theme of Augustine's theme of evil, because how do you make, and I forget what they're called now, the evil orcs. How do you make an orc? Orc is the evil beings that will attack. How do you make an orc? Yes. You have these elves. Elves are good. The elves symbolize the angels. They're good. But a perverted elf is an orc. Does that make sense? So, or Gollum. Gollum was a hobbit, but he gets perverted by evil. So he gets certain things. He can live a long time, but he becomes incredibly broken. So evil is nothing. Then sinful people, when you participate in sin, it perverts you to want nothing. They turn away from what they should want, and the aim of their lives is chasing after things that are empty and meaningless. And so the problem with evil is that it lessens us, it perverts us from a holy good nature. So here, Augustine points out that Adam and Eve didn't create sin. It's a story of the pattern that we want to see nothing as something good. So it's a psychologically deep statement. He's saying when people do something, they tell themselves that there's a reason, and that reason seems good. It's not just a reflex, it's a justification. So the doer of evil, for them to do evil, they have to say that the evil is good. So there's this movie, and in a line in the movie, this person says, everybody has their reasons. That's very Augustine. Augustine is saying that they have a reason. It may not be a true reason, it may not be a good reason, but they rationally convince themselves that this evil is good. People don't look for perfect justification, just the appearance of evil. So when somebody says, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, that's a very Augustine idea of evil. People want to do some evil, but then they call it patriotism or justice or bravery. Does that make sense? So you just pervert what is good. So, like, I'm not evil. I was just standing up for my country. So humans, he says, look for, at least for that moment, a reason to justify their evil. And this is deep, because Augustine says most people don't choose evil for evil's sake. They want to say it's good. So they're telling themselves they're choosing the good. Does that make sense? Augustine applies this not just to humans, but Satan. Because remember, the ancient story of Satan. Satan says, I will not serve, right? I will not serve humanity. I only serve God. So that's how Lucifer became Satan, if you remember that lecture. But Lucifer considers himself just so devoted to God that I will not serve mud, human beings. Does that make sense? So, oh, no, but you're not obeying God. But Lucifer doesn't tell himself he's disobeying God. He's saying, I love God and I'm not going to serve you filth. Does that make sense? So in Luther's own thinking, he's serving God. Or the jealous lover who kills somebody, it's only from an outside view that we can say this is not love. It is destructive. But for Augustine, even love can be perverted. So the jealous lover sees himself as good. This is a dark psychology, but I find it very true. Does that make any sense? Like, people will justify himself. But Augustine said that this also has a hidden optimism to it. It also means, ironically, that human beings have not gone completely astray from the good path because they still think in terms of the good, even though they've perverted the good. They want to call themselves good. That's a little bit of hope. Now, if you notice in the Bible, especially in the Gospels and the book of Revelation, evil always dresses itself up as good or religious. Or think about this, like Somali pirates, they don't call themselves pirates. You know what they call themselves? The savior of the seas. That they're just defending the good, even though they steal, kill, and buy drugs. Does that make any sense? I just think it's incredible. Now I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to skip a lot. So I'm going to skip like 4 pages. Well, no, that's what you get. But because I want to, there's also a couple other concepts that I love about Augustine. And his is the theology of desire. And so, Augustine says, you know where most of the evils in the world come from? because we don't desire strong enough. So remember Augustine's, now this I just thought was an incredible insight. So Augustine, in one of his homilies, says, take like premarital sex. Is premarital sex wrong? Anybody have an opinion? Oh, you think it's wrong? Why? Augustine would say sex is natural. Sex is completely natural. What could be, God created sex. What could be wrong about it? Well, he gives this great homily where he says, premarital sex, it's not like murder, where, you want to kill somebody. That's just a darkness. Does that make sense? Like, you're attracted to this person, you're in love with this person, God created sex. What could possibly be wrong with that? And Augustine says, now as an old man, I get it. He said, think of the levels of desire, where he puts it as good, better, and best. Not all sins are sins because I just choose the dark and want to destroy you. Some sins are created because you didn't choose the best. So he puts it in this. Like, is sexual passion good? Yes. So that's a good. But what's better is sexual passion and love. And he said, I had that. He said, he was very promiscuous. He fell in love with this woman, lived with her for 17 years. They had a 13-year-old son who died. He said, that is far better. That's a deeper desire. The best of all is love, passion, and commitment. And he said, I could never offer her or my son that, because I so trained myself in years of promiscuity that the woman I loved, I couldn't be faithful to. And I broke her heart. I broke my son's heart. I created evil because I didn't desire the best. So it's not a question of black and white. Is it good or evil? It's a question of, no, evil sometimes happens because our desires are too weak. They need to be stronger. Seek the absolute best. And if you don't seek the strongest desire, love, passion, and commitment, you'll end up hurting people. So in this homily, he says, trust me, as an old man, I get it. You do not want to have my regret. Only now could I see how that was evil. Does that make any sense? So I also love his theology of desire, that, if you don't desire strong enough, you can create evil in the world. So my only point being, is I can't go over all of it because now I'm out of time, but like Irenaeus' idea is that you must face up to evil. I really appreciate that as well. You want to become a mature, just don't say, well, all I need is to accept Christ and then I'll become. No, once you accept Christ, you have to face up to the evil. You've caused the evil in the world. Augustine is more about the psychology of evil. I think he's right. Evil perverts the good. People who commit evil, they'll always say that they're doing it for a good reason. So you really learn to lie to yourself. Secondly, evil comes about because we don't desire strong enough. So that's just an overview of Irenaeus and Augustine. Does that make sense? Questions, objections? So, yes. No. The fall is not God's desire. Because you'll hear some people say, oh, the fall brought about Christ. Humanity was fallen, so Christ came. Irenaeus would say, no. Christ would have come either way to bring us to greater maturity. It's only the garden of potentiality. Christ still needed to come. What the fall brought about was the cross. I don't know. I don't know that exact phrase, but yeah, it sounds Augustine. Sin darkens the intellect. Yeah, you can't see what you're doing. To summarize my homilies for the last 2 years, don't do it. Yeah, that's a great, yeah. Yeah, I do like that. I didn't know I said that, but sure. But think it also means that, if you're Catholic, a lot of people think they want religion to keep you safe. Religion doesn't keep you safe in Irenaeus' view. Religion makes you face up to things. Oh, Augustine would be all about free will. But you have to train your free will to desire the most. Like Augustine would be, you didn't train your will strong enough. Does that make sense? So another really big theme I'm not covering, this would be another, is Augustine's idea of freedom, which you're getting at. It takes, with God's grace, it takes a lot of work to gain free, to become, have a really free soul. But freedom for Augustine, it is hard won. A lot of people don't want that. But you always have free will. You always have free will. That is never taken away from you. Does that make sense? Okay, so next week I'm going to do something really strange. I love evil. That was a joke. But I only have a couple more classes. But I could teach on this using literature. So this is my plan. Next week to cover Mark Twain and John Stuart Mill. Because I know, but they make really good. And then my last class will be Camus, Solzhenitsyn. There's such great stuff out there about evil, especially in the modern world. So next week, Mark Twain and John Stuart Mill. So glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. All right, thank you. Thank you for the treats. Oh, no problem.